Kia ora koutou. And today I thought it might be interesting to have a talk about the topic of the church. And I think when we often, especially nowadays, think of the church, we think of maybe different denominations that we see church buildings for going down the street or in a particular area. And that can sometimes get a little bit confusing because there are so many church buildings around a city or a suburb, depending on what part of the world that you actually live in. And I thought it might be neat to have a look at what the Bible sort of defines as being the church. And so in a biblical context, we have a look at the church, we're actually looking particularly at the New Testament in the Bible. And nowhere in the New Testament in the Bible does it really refer to what a church building should look like, that we should actually meet on a Sunday in a church building, or what a service should look like on a Sunday morning. The concept of three songs on a Sunday, then some notices, then maybe a sermon of about 30 minutes, and maybe some songs and some prayer to finish out the service. Never actually appears in the Bible. The Bible does refer to, I guess, the universal family of God. So if we start to look at this concept of a universal family of God in the Bible, it is referring to the church throughout the ages and through a variety of different geographic locations as well. And I like to refer to this as the church with a big C, and that is a community of believers that spans time and space. In my view of how the universal church is talked about. Most often, though, as individuals, as believers in a community, we get to see the local expression of a church. So, this is what I refer to as church with a little c. Sometimes we've had good experiences with the local church. Sometimes we've had bad experiences with the local church. Sometimes we have had mediocre experiences with the local church. And I think that's probably a reflection of the fallibility of humans to start with. We don't always get it right, even as Christians. And I think it also reflects different theologies, maybe on some of the minor theologies of the Bible. So if it's a Christian church, you would hope that you'd see some central things that are the same, and then maybe some things around the outskirts of how things are done, maybe some traditions that is different in each denomination. Maybe we could think of it like a bag of fruit burst sweets. I don't know if you have those in your country, but think of a bag of sweeties or candies or lollies, perhaps, that all sort of have the same name, but they have different flavors. And some of them you'll like for fruit bursts, for example. If I was still eating them, I don't particularly like the banana ones. But I love the orange ones and the green ones. I can't actually remember what flavour the green ones are. But I like those flavours, whereas the banana was never my favourite flavour. And I'd probably say the same thing about many different churches that I might have visited over my period of being a Christian. So we can think about the local church as being those different sweetie flavours, and we might like some better than the other. But is there any sort of purposes? Is there any sort of things that we would hope that a local expression of the church would actually be doing or would have as a purpose? And I think a local expression of the church, there should be three main purposes of that church. And these aren't in any particular order, they're just sort of how I thought about them. The first purpose would be that we are worshipping God, that we're coming together to worship God. And that would be one of the purposes of that church in the local community. Another purpose for a church community is to actually help Christians grow in their faith, believers to grow in their faith, to deepen their faith, to move from being an infant in the faith and mature into a child and then into an adult within the faith and keep maturing. And the sort of the third purpose that I see, as I said, they're not in any particular order, but a ministry to the people outside of the church, and that could be in many different formats. But the two sort of that I was thinking of was evangelism, so telling people about the gospel, and acts of mercy, so things like caring for the poor and needy in the name of the Lord. So those are sort of things that I was thinking about as ministry to people outside of the church. And I think it's really important when we think about those three purposes that we think about the balance that we have in a church. Now, we should have all of those present in a church. I believe we should have all of those present as a church, those purposes. And I think that they should all have the same influence over what the church actually decides to do. Now, that's as a collective that I think that those three purposes should collectively be undertaken as a church and be equal in the undertaking. As an individual, though, within the church, I think there's probably a little bit of flexibility there because obviously we all have our own giftings. And so, if you're particularly gifted in teaching, say, perhaps you might find that growing Christians is your focus, and there might be a lesser focus on the purposes of the church in your individual lives. Maybe you need to think about what your church, your local expression of your church is, the fellowship that you go to, the life group, the home church, the denominational church that you go to, and think about those three purposes and go, are they actually equally represented in the church body that I go to and am part of? Or do we need to do some tweaking? If you think there's some tweakings required in those purposes, maybe it's talking to the leadership of your local expression of the church and saying, how can we improve in the balance that we have and also the way that we're doing these different purposes as well. Yeah, just some thoughts on the church and have a think about those purposes and to discuss with people whether you think that your local expression of the church is doing a good, mediocre, or maybe a bad job at being that local expression of the church. So I'll leave that for you to think about. Ka kite anō.